A 6-year-old girl hides in the office of a luxurious mansion when she witnesses the cruel millionaire collapsing to the floor after a massive heart attack. While all the employees panic, not knowing what to do, the little girl emerges from the shadows and declares, "I'm a doctor, let me help." The millionaire, still conscious for a few seconds, looks at her with contempt and thinks it's just child's play before fainting completely. Then the girl does something that leaves everyone paralyzed with shock. When the paramedics finally arrive at the scene, they are completely surprised by what they find. The biting cold of that winter morning seemed to pierce right through Amira, who walked silently through the still deserted city streets. Her small fingers, already reddening from the icy wind, clutched tightly at the hem of her mother, Layla's worn-out coat. At 6 years old, Amira had learned that silence was her best companion on the walks to the mansion where her mother worked as a cleaner. Layla glanced nervously around as they walked. Her brown eyes, which had seen so much suffering in their homeland, now carried a different kind of worry, the constant tension of someone living in fear of discovery, of being sent away, of losing the only opportunity to provide a better life for her daughter. Each step towards Mr. Harrison Vance's imposing mansion was a mixture of gratitude and humiliation. "Amira, sweetheart," whispered Layla, her voice thick with affection and worry, "you must stay in the park today. You can't come all the way to the house with me. Mr. Vance has been more irritable than usual, and if he sees you—" The girl looked up with her dark, penetrating eyes, far too mature for her age. "But Mommy, what if you need me? What if someone gets hurt?" Her voice, though still childish, carried a seriousness that made Layla's heart ache. During the long months of escape from her war-torn country, Layla had been forced to teach her daughter knowledge no child should carry. As a former military paramedic, she knew life could separate them at any moment, and Amira needed to know how to treat injuries, how to help people in danger. What started as a survival necessity had transformed into something extraordinary. The girl absorbed every medical lesson with frightening ease. "You are so brave, my little doctor," Layla said, stroking her daughter's cold face. "Oh, but today I need you to be brave by staying safe in the park. Promise me." Amira nodded, but her eyes were already planning something else. She had noticed how her mother came home from work looking more worn down each day, with held-back tears and shoulders slumped under the weight of humiliation. Mr. Vance wasn't just a demanding employer, he was cruel, taking pleasure in belittling the people who worked for him, especially her mother, whom he knew was a refugee and vulnerable. When Layla disappeared through the mansion's gilded gates, Amira waited exactly 5 minutes before moving. She knew every corner of that property from watching, every service entrance, every window left slightly ajar. Her heart pounded as she crept through the perfectly manicured gardens, but her determination was stronger than her fear. The unmistakable smell of cleaning products mixed with the aroma of expensive coffee filled her nostrils as she slipped inside through the kitchen door. Voices echoed down the hall, her mother talking quietly with other staff, and in the distance, Rodrigo Vance's harsh, commanding voice yelling into the phone in his office. Amira hid behind the heavy velvet curtains of the office, her small body trembling not just from cold, but from a mix of fear and indignation. Through the gap, she could see the man who tormented her mother daily, tall, well-dressed, with graying hair slicked back and a perpetually scowling expression. "I don't want to hear your excuses," he yelled into the phone, gesturing violently. "I've lost millions because of your incompetence. If you don't fix this today, I—" Suddenly, Mr. Vance stopped mid-sentence. His free hand flew to his chest. His eyes widened in panic and terror. The phone slipped from his hand, hitting the Italian marble floor with a dull thud. For a moment that seemed eternal, he stood frozen, staggering, before collapsing like a rag doll, his body convulsing uncontrollably. The silence that followed was broken by the desperate shouts of the staff who rushed into the office. This was the moment that would change everything. and little Amira knew exactly what needed to be done. Panic swept through the office like a devastating wave. Maria, the cook, screamed desperately while John, the gardener, ran in circles, unsure where to turn. Staff crowded the doorway, whispering prayers and laments, but no one dared approach their convulsing boss. "Someone call an ambulance!" shouted Carlos, the butler. His voice choked with desperation. His hands were shaking too badly to even dial the emergency number on the old desk phone. It was in this moment of absolute chaos that a small but surprisingly firm voice cut through the turmoil like a sharp blade. "I'm a doctor. Let me help." Everyone turned simultaneously, and what they saw left them frozen in astonishment. Amira had emerged from behind the curtains, her dark eyes shining with a determination that starkly contrasted with her frail appearance. Her worn-out coat and scuffed shoes seemed even more out of place in the luxurious surroundings. But there was something in her posture that commanded respect. "Child, what are you doing here?" Carlos stammered, torn between surprise and the urgency of the situation. "There's no time for questions," Amira replied, already heading towards the fallen man with firm steps. "He's having a heart attack. If we don't act in the next few minutes, he's going to die." The naturalness with which she spoke left everyone stunned. A 6-year-old child shouldn't know medical terms, let alone diagnose a heart attack with such accuracy. Amira knelt beside Harrison Vance, who continued to convulse on the cold floor. Her small fingers found his pulse on his neck with a precision that made Maria sob in surprise. For a few seconds, she kept her eyes closed, concentrating, as if listening to something only she could perceive. "His pulse is very weak and irregular," she announced. Her voice maintaining the professional calm she'd learned watching her mother in emergencies. "Carlos, stop trying to call and go get the defibrillator from the cabinet behind Mr. Vance's desk. John, I need you to run to the entrance and guide the ambulance when it arrives." The authority in her voice was so convincing that the adult men obeyed without question, as if she were an experienced doctor giving orders in a hospital. Amira positioned her small hands over Harrison Vance's chest and began chest compressions. Her movements were precise, rhythmic, exactly as Layla had taught her during those terrible nights in their homeland, when injured soldiers arrived at the makeshift medical post where her mother worked. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted softly, pressing with all the strength her small hands could muster. "Come on, Mr. Vance. Don't give up now." Maria slowly approached, tears falling silently as she watched the impossible scene. A refugee child, who should have been playing or studying, was fighting to save the life of the man who made her mother's life a daily hell. "Where did she learn that?" Maria whispered to another staff member. The answer came in the form of a painful memory that flashed through Amira's eyes for a fraction of a second. Images of refugee camps, of the wounded being rushed in, of her mother working tirelessly to save lives while bombs exploded in the distance. But she pushed those memories away with the same determination she applied to the compressions. Carlos ran back with the defibrillator, his fingers trembling as he tried to turn it on. "I don't know how to use this thing," he admitted, embarrassed. "I do," Amira said simply, her hands already reaching for the equipment. At that moment, no one doubted she knew what she was doing. Amira's small hands handled the defibrillator with a familiarity that left everyone present in shock. She checked the pads, adjusted the device settings, and placed the pads on Harrison Vance's chest with the precision of an experienced professional. "Everyone step back," she ordered, her voice echoing through the office with an authority no one dared question. "No one can be touching him when I apply the shock." Maria instinctively backed away, hand to her chest as she murmured a prayer. Carlos remained standing beside the desk, his eyes fixed on the girl who had become their only hope of saving their boss. Amira took a deep breath, her small hands positioned firmly on the defibrillator's controls. For a moment, a flicker of vulnerability crossed her eyes, the memory of a terrible night when she'd seen her mother use the same equipment on a soldier too young who hadn't made it. But she pushed that memory away with determination, delivering shock. "Now!" she announced, pressing the button. Harrison Vance's body jolted violently from the electric shock. For a few seconds that seemed eternal. Silence dominated the room, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the defibrillator itself. Amira immediately placed her fingers on his neck, feeling for vital signs. "His pulse is back," she whispered, and a wave of relief washed over the group. "But it's still weak. I need to keep compressions going until the paramedics arrive." Just then, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Layla appeared in the office doorway, her eyes widening in horror at the sight of her daughter kneeling beside the unconscious boss, surrounded by panicked staff. "Amira, what are you doing here?" Layla cried, rushing towards her daughter. Her voice trembled between fear for her daughter and terror of being blamed for the situation. "Mum, Mr. Vance had a heart attack," Amira explained calmly, not stopping compressions. "I got here just in time. He'll be okay, but I need to keep his heart going until the paramedics arrive." Layla knelt beside her daughter, her hands shaking as she watched the child apply advanced medical techniques. Pride and terror mingled in her chest, pride in her daughter's extraordinary competence, terror of the consequences it might bring. "My dear, you shouldn't be here," she murmured, stroking Amira's dark hair. "If anyone finds out—" "Mom, I needed to help," Amira replied, maintaining the perfect rhythm of compressions. "You taught me that saving lives is the most important thing. And he's just a man who needs help." Carlos, who had witnessed the entire scene, slowly approached Layla. His eyes were moist with emotion, and his words came out choked. "Mrs. Layla, your daughter, she saved Mr. Vance's life. I've never seen anything like it. She knew exactly what to do when we were all lost." Maria nodded vigorously, wiping away tears with her apron. "It's true. She appeared like an angel and took charge of everything. Spoke like a real doctor." The distant wail of ambulance sirens finally reached everyone's ears. John ran up to the doorway. "The ambulance is here!" "I'm guiding them now." Amira continued compressions until she heard the heavy footsteps of paramedics in the hallway. Only then did she stop, her small hands finally showing signs of the strain. She sat back on her heels, watching the professionals enter with their equipment. The most experienced paramedic, a middle-aged man with graying hair, stopped abruptly when he saw the scene. His eyes went from the girl to the patient, then to the still-connected defibrillator. "Who administered the first aid?" he asked, genuinely confused. All the staff pointed at Amira simultaneously. He looked at her incredulously, then knelt beside Harrison Vance to assess his vitals. "That's impossible," he muttered, checking his pulse and blood pressure. "Whoever did this saved his life." The experienced paramedic, who introduced himself as Robert, couldn't hide his bewilderment as he examined Harrison Vance. He checked the defibrillator pads, noted the perfect placement of the paddles, and analyzed the patient's vital signs with growing astonishment. "In 30 years on the job, I've never seen such precise first aid," he murmured to his younger partner. "Lucas, look at the hand placement during compressions, not a misplaced mark on his chest. Whoever did this knows cardiac anatomy." Lucas looked over at Amira, who stood beside her mother in respectful silence while the professionals worked. "Robert, she can't be more than 6. How is that possible?" As they prepared Harrison Vance for transport, Robert addressed the girl directly. His kind, experienced eyes studied her serious face, searching for answers that seemed impossible. "Little one, can you tell me how you learned to do all this?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "You were very brave, but those techniques, they're very advanced." Amira looked to her mother, as if asking permission to speak. Layla nodded slightly, her hands trembling as she held her daughter's shoulders. "My mommy taught me," Amira replied, her voice soft but clear. She's a doctor too. Back home, I saw a lot of injured people, and she said I needed to know how to help if she wasn't around. Tears began to trickle silently down Amira's cheeks as painful memories flooded back. There were many injured soldiers, and sometimes children too. Mommy worked day and night to save everyone. Robert felt a pang in his chest, hearing those words. He had worked in conflict zones himself and knew exactly the kind of situation that had forged this extraordinary child. He looked at Layla with newfound respect and understanding. "Were you a military paramedic?" he asked Layla, who nodded shyly. "Commander of the emergency medical unit," she admitted hesitantly. "But now, just a cleaner." "I can't work as a doctor here." The revelation caused a murmur among the staff present. Carlos, in particular, looked like he'd been struck by lightning. For months, he had treated Layla like a mere cleaner, unaware she possessed medical qualifications superior to many professionals he knew. As the medical team finished stabilizing Harrison Vance for transport, Maria approached Layla hesitantly. "Mom, I didn't know. Please forgive me if I was ever disrespectful," but not everyone present reacted with the same generosity. Eleanor, the head housekeeper, watched the scene with narrowed eyes and a growing expression of distrust. She had worked in the mansion for over 15 years and always felt her position threatened by any employee who might impress the boss. "How convenient," she murmured to Sandra, another staff member. "Just when the boss has a problem, this whole story comes out. Don't you think it's suspicious that a child knows exactly what to do?" Sandra, always impressionable and eager to join the dominant group, began sowing her own doubts. "It is very strange. How do we know they didn't plan this?" Baseless suspicions began to spread like wildfire among some staff. Jealousy and envy, always simmering beneath the surface, found an opportunity to grow in the extraordinary situation. Robert, oblivious to the malicious gossip starting to circulate, finished preparing Harrison Vance for transport. Before leaving, he addressed the girl directly. "Little doctor," he said with a warm smile, "you did a magnificent job today. I'm sure you saved this man's life. Your mother must be very proud." Amira smiled shyly, but her eyes remained serious. "Will he be okay?" "Thanks to you, yes," Robert replied. "But he needs to go to the hospital now. Would you like to come along to the ambulance?" The simple question created a moment of tension. Layla knew exposing her daughter further could bring consequences, but she also recognized Amira deserved to see the result of her bravery. However, the decision was made by an unexpected voice, Harrison Vance, who had briefly regained consciousness during transport. "Wait." Harrison Vance's weak voice cut through the air like a ghostly whisper. His eyes opened slowly. Unfocused but aware, searching the surrounding group for something or someone, Robert immediately leaned over him, checking his vitals as everyone else cautiously drew closer. "Mr. Vance, you've had a heart attack. You need to stay calm while we take you to the hospital." But Vance wasn't interested in medical care at that moment. His eyes scanned the group until they landed on Amira's small figure, still clinging to her mother's hand. An expression of confusion and something akin to recognition flickered across his pale face. The girl," he murmured with difficulty, trying to raise one hand. "It was her who helped me." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Staff watched their employer's reaction, some hopefully, others with growing apprehension about what his words might mean for Layla and Amira. "Yes, sir," Carlos replied hesitantly. "Your daughter. She knew exactly what to do. She saved your life." Vance tried to focus on Amira's face, but his strength was rapidly fading. How could a child..." His words trailed off as he lost consciousness again, leaving everyone with more questions than answers. Robert and Lucas quickly resumed transport procedures, knowing every second was crucial. "He needs to get to the hospital now," Robert declared. "Oh, but I want you to know that without this little girl's intervention, we'd be transporting a body, not a patient." As the ambulance pulled away with Vance, the shrill sound of sirens fading, a strange silence settled over the mansion's office. Staff looked at each other, as if trying to process what had just happened. Eleanor was the first to break the silence, her voice laced with venomous insinuation. "Very convenient, isn't it? The boss has an attack right when this girl decides to show up here." "What are you implying, Eleanor?" Maria asked, indignation rising. "Well, think about it," Eleanor continued, addressing the group as if revealing a conspiracy. "A 6-year-old who knows medicine better than adults, a cleaner who just happens to be a military doctor. Doesn't it all seem a bit suspicious?" Sandra, always impressionable and eager to join the dominant group, added her own fantasies to the toxic narrative. What if they brought some substance from their country, something that could cause a heart attack and then be reversed? Absurd theories took on a life of their own, fueled by fear and the latent xenophobia that had always existed among some staff members. The fact that Layla and Amira were refugees, different, speaking another language, made them easy targets for all sorts of projection and paranoia. Maria, who had initially defended the family, began to waver under the constant pressure of insinuations. Maybe we should just be careful," she murmured, avoiding the gaze of Carlos, who remained one of Layla's few defenders. "Careful about what?" Carlos exploded during one of these conversations. "About a woman who works 16 hours a day to support her daughter. About a child who saved our employer's life. Have you lost touch with reality?" But his words seemed to echo into the void. The atmosphere in the mansion had become toxic, charged with suspense and mutual distrust. Every sideways glance, every hushed conversation cut short when Layla entered a room. Every heavy silence that fell when she passed in the hallway, all contributed to an atmosphere of growing isolation. During a particularly difficult afternoon, as Layla cleaned the office where it had all happened, she found a piece of paper that had fallen behind Vance's desk. It was a list of emergency contacts, and among them, she recognized the number for the local immigration service. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. She knew there was nothing suspicious about the list. Every responsible employer kept emergency contacts, but in her fragile emotional state, every detail transformed into a potential threat. "Mommy?" Amira's voice surprised her. The girl had managed to sneak into the mansion again, worried about her mother's increasingly fragile state. "Amira, you can't be here," Layla whispered desperately, hiding the contact list. "If anyone sees you, they're already saying bad things about us, aren't they?" Amira asked, with that unsettling perception she always showed. "I see it in their eyes when they look at you." Layla knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a tight hug. "My dear, sometimes people don't understand when something good happens unexpectedly. They prefer to believe bad things. But I just wanted to help," Amira murmured against her mother's chest. "Why is that bad?" Before Layla could answer, heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Eleanor appeared in the office doorway, her eyes narrowing as she saw mother and daughter hugging in the very spot where the incident had occurred. "How interesting," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The little doctor returned to the scene of the crime. Eleanor's cruel smile sent a chill down Layla's spine, but it was Amira who replied, her small voice echoing through the office with a dignity that belied her age. "It's not a crime scene," she said calmly, looking directly into Eleanor's eyes. "It's the place where I saved a life." Eleanor laughed scornfully, but before she could reply, the sound of a ringing phone cut through the tension. It was Vance's desk phone, and all three turned to look at it as if it were a bomb about to detonate. "It must be from the hospital," Layla murmured, but neither of them moved to answer. The phone continued ringing insistently until Carlos rushed into the hallway, out of breath and with an urgent expression. "Eleanor, Layla, someone needs to get that. It's from St. Vincent's Hospital," he shouted, brushing past them to grab the phone. "Hello? Yes, this is Mr. Harrison Vance's residence." The silence that followed was deafening. Carlos listened intently, his face moving through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, and finally, something like profound shock. "Yes, I understand. Thank you very much for the call," he said slowly, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, her mask of superiority beginning to crack. He died." Carlos turned slowly to the group, his eyes fixed on Amira with an expression mixing reverence and awe. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He woke up, and the first thing he did was ask for the girl who saved his life. Carlos's words echoed through the office like thunder. Eleanor visibly paled, while Layla put a hand to her chest, her heart pounding. "More than that," Carlos continued, now looking directly at Eleanor. "The doctor said he wants to speak urgently with the mansion's administration. Apparently, he has some very important things to say about how his staff treat each other." Eleanor's world began to crumble. For years, she had built her position of power through petty cruelties, venomous gossip, and subtle manipulations. The possibility that Vance knew about her actions, or worse, would investigate after nearly dying, terrified her. I need to check on the kitchen," she stammered, hurrying out of the office. Carlos waited until Eleanor was gone before turning to Layla and Amira with a gentle expression. "There's more," he said softly. "Mr. Vance specifically asked for both of you to visit him at the hospital. He said he has something very important to tell the little doctor." Amira looked at her mother, her eyes shining with hope. "Mommy, does this mean he's okay? That I really helped him?" Layla knelt beside her daughter, her tears finally falling freely. "Yes, my dear, you saved his life, and now everyone knows it." But even in that moment of vindication, Layla felt a growing unease. The hospital call had changed everything, but it also meant her daughter would be even more exposed, more watched. "Carlos," she murmured hesitantly, "do you think it's safe to take Amira to the hospital? With all these suspicions?" Carlos smiled for the first time in days. "Layla, I think you'll find things are about to change significantly around here. Mr. Vance can be many things, but he's never been foolish, and when a man stares death in the face and is saved by a 6-year-old angel, well, that tends to change one's perspective on many things." At that moment, unbeknownst to them, Eleanor was in her room, making desperate calls to contacts she'd cultivated over the years. If she could no longer count on Vance's unconditional support, she would need to find other ways to protect her position, even if it meant escalating her actions against the refugee family. The storm brewing would be greater than any of them imagined, but it would also bring with it the possibility of a transformation that would change all their lives forever. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and hope mingled together, an aroma that immediately transported Layla back to the medical fields of her homeland. She held Amira's hand tightly as they walked towards Harrison Vance's room, their footsteps echoing softly on the gleaming linoleum floor. Amira wore her best dress, a simple but clean garment Layla had hand-sewn from fabric bought on sale. The girl observed everything around her with that intense curiosity she always showed, but her usual questions were replaced by a thoughtful silence. "Mommy," she whispered as they neared the room's door, "what if he's still angry with us? What if he just wants to send us away?" Layla stopped and knelt before her daughter, affectionately adjusting a stray strand of hair from her makeshift ponytail. "My dear, a man who woke up from a coma asking to see you isn't angry. He's grateful." As they entered the room, Harrison Vance was sitting up in bed, several medical devices still connected to his body. He looked smaller, more fragile than in the mansion, but his eyes held a clarity Layla had never seen before. "So you're the little doctor," he said softly, extending a trembling hand towards Amira. His voice, once always harsh and commanding, now carried a genuine kindness. Amira hesitated for a moment before approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" she asked sincerely. her eyes scanning the monitors like a small professional assessing her patient. Vance smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face completely. "Much better, thanks to you. The doctors told me everything. You saved my life, little one." "I just did what my mommy taught me," Amira replied modestly. "She's the real doctor." Vance then looked at Layla, and she could see something breaking inside him. Years of prejudice, arrogance, and unnecessary cruelty crumbling before the reality of his own mortality and the undeserved kindness he'd received. "Layla," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I need to ask for your forgiveness. For months, I treated you as if you were beneath me. I never bothered to learn who you really were, where you came from, what sacrifices you made to be here." Tears began to roll down the cheeks of the man who, days before, had been feared by all his staff. "When I was dying on that floor, the only person who cared enough to save me was the daughter of the woman I humiliated the most." Layla felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "Mr. Vance, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted firmly. "I need to, because I almost died being a terrible person, and I'm only alive to have a chance to be better thanks to this extraordinary child." He looked back at Amira. "You gave me more than life. You gave me the chance for redemption." Amira, with that unnerving wisdom she always showed, moved closer to the bed. "My mommy always says that everyone has goodness inside them. Sometimes it's hidden, but it's always there." The girl's simple words touched Vance in a way no sermon or reprimand ever could have. He looked at Layla with new admiration. "You raised an extraordinary daughter," he said. "But I wasted months of opportunity getting to know you both." He paused, as if gathering courage for his next words. "I would like to offer you a position commensurate with your qualifications. Head of the emergency medical department for my companies, with a proper salary, full benefits, and education for Amira." The silence that followed was filled only by the rhythmic beeps of the medical equipment. Layla looked at her daughter, then back at Vance, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd just heard. "But sir," she murmured, "my papers, my legal status, it will be handled," Vance said determinedly. "I have excellent lawyers and enough influence to ensure you get all the necessary documentation to work and live here legally." Amira tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, does this mean you'll get to be a doctor again?" Before Layla could answer, the room door opened abruptly, and a nurse entered with an urgent expression. "Mr. Vance," the nurse said urgently, "there are 2 immigration officers at the reception desk asking about a refugee family allegedly involved in a suspicious incident concerning you. They want to question them immediately." Layla's blood ran cold. She instinctively pulled Amira closer, her eyes filling with the same terror she'd felt during their escape from their homeland. Her daughter's small hand clutched her arm, and she could feel the girl's body begin to tremble. Vance, still weak but with growing determination in his eyes, tried to sit up straighter in bed. "What kind of suspicious incident?" he asked, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. The nurse hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "They mentioned something about possible intentional poisoning followed by a staged rescue. Someone made an anonymous tip." "Eleanor," Layla whispered, the name leaving her lips like a curse. She knew, with the absolute certainty that comes from experience with malicious people, that the housekeeper had escalated her campaign of revenge. Amira looked at her mother with frightened eyes. "Mommy, are they going to send us back? Are they going to separate us?" Before Layla could answer, Vance pressed the nurse call button with unusual force. "Call my lawyer immediately, Dr. Eduardo Santos. Tell him it's an absolute emergency and he needs to come here now with all the necessary documents for a humanitarian protection petition." The nurse nodded and left quickly, leaving the 3 of them alone in the tense room. Vance looked at Layla with fierce determination. "They aren't taking you," he said firmly. "Not after what you did for me, not while I have breath in my body." "But Mr. Vance," Layla murmured, tears beginning to fall. If someone made an official report, they have protocols, and we don't have strong enough documentation to protect ourselves. Amira, who had remained silent until now, suddenly moved away from her mother and walked purposefully to Vance's bedside. Her small eyes shone with a resolution that seemed too old for her young face. "Mr. Vance," she said clearly, "if they take Mommy, who will take care of me? And if they take me, who will take care of Mommy?" Her words were simple, but carried a devastating truth. Vance felt his heart clench. Here was a 6-year-old child who had saved his life, now facing the possibility of being torn from everything she knew because of the poisonous lies of people he himself had allowed to thrive in his home. "Amira," he said gently, "do you remember how you helped me when I was dying?" She nodded. "You were brave then, and precise. Now I need you to trust me the same way. I will protect you both, but perhaps I need you to be brave one more time." At that moment, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, approaching rapidly. Layla immediately recognized the sound. Official boots, determined steps of people with legal authority. It was the sound that had haunted her nightmares since they arrived in the country. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vance glanced out the room's window, then at the door, quickly calculating his options. "Nurse," he yelled, "I need a wheelchair immediately. I'm having cardiac complications." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Layla looked at him in confusion, but Amira, with her sharp perception, began to understand the plan. "Layla," Vance said quickly, "when they bring the wheelchair, you'll push me to the service elevator. Amira comes with me. Like she's visiting her sick grandfather. We need to get out of here before they reach the room." "But where are we going?" Layla asked desperately. "To a place where I have friends, where I can make calls that actually matter," Vance replied. "To my law firm. Dr. Eduardo isn't just my lawyer. He's a specialist in refugee rights and has direct connections with immigration." The footsteps in the hallway were growing louder, closer. Authoritative voices began to echo, asking for room numbers and patient information. The nurse appeared with the wheelchair, asking no questions. Experience had taught her that sometimes patients knew better than protocols what they needed to do. "Now," Vance whispered, "let's show these people they've completely underestimated who they're dealing with." The wheelchair slid silently down the service corridor, Layla pushing Harrison Vance while Amira walked alongside. Trying to look like a normal family visiting a hospitalized relative. Layla's heart pounded so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it echoing off the sterile hospital walls. "Door on the left," Vance whispered, discreetly pointing to a little-known emergency exit. "My driver should be waiting in the employee parking lot." Amira held Vance's free hand, her small fingers clinging to his as if he were her only anchor to safety. Her eyes, always alert, scanned their surroundings, noting every suspicious movement, every sound that might indicate the officer's approach. When they reached the service elevator, the doors opened to reveal 2 janitorial staff members who glanced curiously at the unlikely group. Vance immediately adopted the role of a frail patient. "My granddaughter wanted to see the hospital gardens," he said in a weak voice, smiling at Amira. "The doctors said a bit of fresh air would do my heart good." The staff smiled understandingly and made way, unsuspecting. During the tense descent, Layla kept her eyes fixed on the illuminated floor numbers, each passing level representing more distance between them and the immediate threat. When the doors opened into the basement, the fresh air of the parking garage had never felt so liberating. Carlos, Vance's personal driver, waited as planned, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw his employer in a wheelchair accompanied by the refugee family. "Mr. Vance, what's going on?" he asked, rushing to help. "Carlos, I need you to take us to Dr. Eduardo Santos's office downtown. It's an absolute emergency, and perhaps our only chance to rectify a grave injustice." As they helped Vance into the car, distant sirens could be heard wailing through the city. Layla shivered, recalling all the times that sound had signaled danger back home. "Mommy," Amira whispered as they settled into the back seat. "Why do people want to hurt us when we're just trying to help?" Her daughter's innocent question pierced Layla's heart like a blade. How could she explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes the world punishes kindness simply because it comes packaged differently than expected? "Sometimes, my dear," she replied softly. "People are afraid of what they don't understand, and when they're afraid, they make bad choices." Vance, who had been observing their conversation, felt a wave of shame, realizing how often he himself had been exactly that kind of person. Someone who punished differences instead of celebrating them. The car sped through the city, Carlos navigating the streets with the expertise of someone who knew every shortcut and every way to avoid heavy traffic. With every block they passed, Vance felt his determination grow. He wouldn't just save Layla and Amira, he would ensure they never had to live in fear again. "Is Dr. Eduardo already waiting?" Layla asked nervously. "Yes," Vance replied, checking his phone. "And he's not alone. He managed to contact a federal judge specializing in refugee cases, and also a representative from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees who was visiting the city." Amira looked at him with admiration. "You did all this for us." "Little doctor," Vance said, covering her hand with his. "You saved me from more than just a heart attack. You saved me from being a terrible person for the rest of my life. Now it's my turn to save you." As they arrived at the imposing building housing the law firm, Layla could see several official cars parked on the street, some from the immigration department, others she couldn't identify. Her stomach churned with anxiety. "So many cars," she murmured. "Harrison, maybe we should—" "No," he interrupted firmly. "Some of those cars are here to protect us, not to threaten us. Dr. Eduardo has mobilized an entire network of people who care about justice." Carlos pulled the car up in front of the building and rushed to open the doors. As Vance emerged, leaning on a cane Carlos had provided, he turned to Amira with an encouraging smile. "Ready to show these people what a little doctor can do when the truth is on her side?" Amira nodded, her hand finding her mother's. Together, the 3 unlikely figures walked toward the building's glass doors, unaware that on the other side awaited not just salvation, but the final confrontation that would determine their destinies forever. The law firm's lobby was filled with people, creating an impromptu courtroom atmosphere that made Layla hold her breath. Dr. Eduardo Santos, a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, approached the group immediately, his expression showing both relief and urgency. "Harrison, thank God you made it in time," he said, greeting his client with a warm handshake before turning to Layla and Amira. "And these must be the 2 extraordinary women who've caused all this commotion." Behind him, Layla could see a conference room with large glass windows where several individuals sat around an oval table. She immediately recognized the uniforms of immigration officers, but there were also other figures in elegant suits she couldn't identify. "Dr. Eduardo," Vance said, leaning heavily on his cane, "I trust you've obtained the documents I requested." "More than that," the lawyer replied with a hopeful smile. "Federal Judge Helena Carter agreed to preside over an emergency hearing. The UN representative has brought international precedents. And," he paused dramatically, "we've managed to locate and bring in a very special witness." At that moment, the conference room door opened, and a figure that made Layla's heart stop appeared. Robert, the paramedic who had attended Vance at the mansion. His eyes met Amira's, and he smiled with genuine affection. "Little doctor," he said, walking toward the group, "I wouldn't miss the chance to tell the truth about what you did." Amira ran towards him, and Robert knelt to receive her in a warm hug. "You really came," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of joy and relief. "Of course, I did," he replied. "Just people like you and your mother deserve to have your story told correctly." Dr. Eduardo led them toward the conference room, where the tension was palpable. At the head of the table sat Judge Helena Carter, a middle-aged woman with a serious but fair expression, observing everything intently. Beside her sat an elegant man who introduced himself as the United Nations representative for refugees. On the other side of the table, two immigration officers consulted a thick folder of documents, their expressions showing a mix of skepticism and professional impatience. Ms. Layla Al-Rashid and Amira Al-Rashid, said the judge, her voice echoing through the silent room. You have been accused of conspiracy to cause harm with intent for personal gain. This is a very serious charge. Layla felt her legs weaken, but Amira's small hand gripping hers gave her the strength to remain standing. Your Honor, Dr. Eduardo interjected, I wish to present evidence that not only completely refutes these accusations, but demonstrates that my client and her daughter are, in fact, victims of a defamation campaign fueled by xenophobia and envy. He opened a folder and produced several medical photographs. These are the images from the resuscitation procedure performed by the girl Amira, captured by the mansion's security cameras. As you can see, every movement she made was technically perfect. The photographs circulated around the table, causing murmurs of astonishment among those present. In the first image, Amira appeared kneeling beside Vance, her small hands in perfect position on his chest. In the second, she operated the defibrillator with professional precision. More importantly, Dr. Eduardo continued, we have the testimony of paramedic Robert Santos, who attended the emergency and can attest to the exceptional competence displayed. Robert stood up, his professional posture contrasting with the tenderness he'd shown Amira minutes earlier. Your Honor, he said, his voice clear and firm, in 30 years of practice, I have never witnessed first aid as precise as that performed by this child. Not only did she save Mr. Vance's life, but she prevented brain damage that could have been permanent. He paused, looking directly at Amira before continuing. A 6-year-old child cannot simulate medical competence of this magnitude. What she did is only possible with real training and, more importantly, with a heart genuinely dedicated to saving lives. The room fell into absolute silence. The immigration officers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly beginning to question the validity of the accusation they had received. It was then that the room door opened again, and an unexpected figure entered, Eleanor, escorted by 2 security guards and wearing an expression of defiance that barely masked her growing desperation. Eleanor entered the room with the posture of someone who still believed she controlled the situation, but her eyes betrayed her escalating panic. She wore her best suit and had carefully styled her hair, as if appearance could mask the rottenness of her intentions. Your Honor, she said, her voice firm, addressing the judge directly. I am Eleanor Costa, head housekeeper at the Vance residence for 15 years. I have crucial information about this family that you need to know. The judge observed her intently, gesturing for her to sit. Proceed, Mrs. Costa, but I remind you that you are under oath, and any false testimony will carry severe legal consequences. Eleanor hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough time for Layla to realize she hadn't waited for this formal warning, but she quickly composed herself, adopting the expression of moral superiority she had perfected over the years. These people, she said, pointing at Layla and Amira, arrived at our home with suspicious stories about being refugees. But I always suspected there was something more sinister about their intentions. Amira, who had remained silent beside her mother until then, suddenly stood up. Her small voice, yet crystal clear, cut through the accusations like a sword of truth. Why are you lying about us? She asked, her dark eyes fixed on Eleanor's face. We never did anything bad to you. The child's direct and innocent question created a moment of awkward silence. Eleanor looked at Amira with a mixture of irritation and surprise. She hadn't expected to be confronted directly by the child. Well, look at that, Eleanor said with a cruel smile. Even a child this age has been trained to manipulate situations. This only confirms my theory that this whole thing was orchestrated. It was then that Vance, who had remained silent, observing the dynamic, decided to intervene. Leaning on his cane, he rose slowly, his presence immediately commanding everyone's attention. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying an authority she hadn't heard in weeks, "are you quite sure you want to continue with these accusations?" The housekeeper stared at him, trying to maintain her composure. "Mr. Vance, I know you're grateful to be alive, but you can't let this cloud your judgment about—" "My judgment is perfectly clear," Vance interrupted firmly. "So clear, in fact, that I've spent the last few days investigating not only what happened the morning of my attack, but also what has been happening in my home for the past few months." He turned to Dr. Eduardo, who immediately opened another folder and produced a set of documents. "Your Honor," said the lawyer, "my client has uncovered evidence that Miss Costa was involved in a systematic scheme of exploiting immigrant workers, using threats of deportation to keep wages below the legal minimum." Eleanor's face visibly paled. This is a desperate attempt to divert attention from the real issue. "We also discovered," Dr. Eduardo continued relentlessly, "that she made multiple anonymous calls to the immigration department, always coinciding with periods when workers questioned their working conditions." Robert, who had observed silently, suddenly stood up. "Your Honor, may I add something?" The judge nodded, and he continued. "On the day Mr. Vance was attacked, when I arrived at the mansion, I noticed something strange. Ms. Costa was the only person who didn't show genuine relief when the patient was stabilized. In fact, she seemed disappointed. The accusation hung in the air like a ticking bomb." Eleanor abruptly stood up, her mask of control finally crumbling. "You can't prove any of this!" she screamed, her shrill voice echoing through the room. "It's just conspiracy theories to protect these intruders." The word intruders, laden with all the venom Eleanor had cultivated for months, reverberated through the silent room. It was then that Amira did something no one expected. She calmly walked over to Eleanor, looked up at her with those dark, wise eyes, and said with a heart-wrenching gentleness, "Ms. Eleanor, why are you so afraid? We just want to be a happy family. We don't want to take anything from anyone." The devastating simplicity of the child's words broke something fundamental within Eleanor, and she slumped into her chair, finally confronted with the monstrosity of her own actions. The silence that followed Amira's words was profound and transformative. Eleanor remained slumped in her chair, her hands trembling as the weight of her actions finally hit her in full force. The tears that began to roll down her cheeks were not tears of self-pity, but tears of genuine shame. Judge Helena watched the scene with the wisdom of someone who had presided over hundreds of cases, yet had never witnessed such a complete transformation wrought by the simple words of a child. "Miss Acosta," she said gently, "would you like to reconsider your testimony in light of the evidence presented?" Eleanor raised her tear-reddened eyes and looked at Amira, who still stood beside her with an expression of genuine concern, not for herself, but for someone clearly in distress. I made it all up," Eleanor admitted, her voice broken. "There was no conspiracy. These people never did anything but be better than I ever was." She looked at Layla with eyes full of remorse. "You worked harder than anyone I've ever met, and I treated you terribly because I was jealous." Layla, demonstrating the great spirit that had characterized her entire journey, approached Eleanor and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Eleanor," she said softly, "we all make mistakes when we are afraid. The important thing is that you found the courage to tell the truth." Layla's undeserved compassion brought a fresh wave of tears to Eleanor, but this time they were tears of release, the kind that come when someone finally stops carrying the weight of their own malice. The UN representative, who had observed the entire scene in respectful silence, finally spoke. "Your Honor, in light of the testimony presented and the documentary evidence, I would like to request that this case be dismissed immediately and that the Al-Rashid family be granted permanent legal protection under international refugee agreements." The judge nodded solemnly. "Request granted. More than that, I order that a full investigation be launched into the labor practices at the Vance residence and similar properties in the region." The two immigration officers who had arrived prepared to process a deportation now put away their documents with expressions of relief. It was evident that neither had felt entirely comfortable with the accusations from the start. Vance, leaning on his cane, walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor, I would like to make a public announcement." He looked at Layla and Amira with determination. "Effective today, I will be formalizing the creation of the Amira Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing medical and educational assistance to refugee families." Amira looked at him in surprise. "A foundation in my name?" "In your name," Vance confirmed with a warm smile. "Because you taught me that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we are capable of giving to others." Dr. Eduardo opened a final folder and produced official documents. "Layla Al-Rashid, here is your permanent work authorization as Director of Emergency Medical Services for the Amira Foundation, with a salary commensurate with your qualifications and full benefits for you and your daughter." Robert, who had watched the entire transformation with growing admiration, approached Amira. "Little doctor, when you grow up and decide if you want to pursue a medical career officially, I would be honored to mentor you." Amira smiled, but her answer revealed the wisdom that had guided all her actions. "I want to help people, but first, I want to just be a girl for a while, play, study normal things, and let my mommy handle the difficult patients." The collective laugh that followed the girl's words definitively broke the room's tension, replacing it with something far more powerful. Hope. Eleanor, who had remained silent during the celebrations, finally stood up. "Layla," she said hesitantly, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but is there any way I can try to fix at least some of the harm I've caused?" Layla looked at the woman who had been her greatest persecutor and saw not a monster, but a wounded person who had found her way back to humanity. "Eleanor," she said with a gentleness that completely disarmed the former housekeeper's defenses, "the Amira Foundation will need people who understand the challenges refugees face. If you truly want to help, there will always be a place for someone who chooses to change." At that moment, everyone in the room understood they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the vindication of an innocent family, but the complete transformation of a community through the redemptive power of truth and compassion. 6 weeks after that cold winter morning that changed everything, Amira walked the corridors of the Amira Foundation Medical Center wearing an impeccable school uniform, but retaining the same natural humility that had always characterized her. The building, which had previously housed only Vance's corporate offices, had been transformed into a medical and educational complex serving refugee families from across the region. Spring sunshine streamed through the large windows, illuminating bilingual signs welcoming visitors in Arabic, Spanish, and English, a celebration of the diversity that now defined this special place. Layla worked in her new office, attending to a Syrian family who had arrived the previous week. Her eyes shone with the satisfaction of finally being able to use her medical skills to help people facing the same challenges she and Amira had overcome. The white coat she wore was not just a uniform, it was the symbol of her restored dignity. In the adjacent room, Vance conducted a meeting with investors interested in replicating the foundation's model in other cities. The man who, 6 weeks earlier, had been saved from a heart attack by a refugee child now dedicated his fortune and influence to ensuring other families wouldn't have to face the same hardships alone. "The little doctor has arrived," Carlos announced cheerfully as Amira entered the educational activities room. He had been promoted to operations coordinator for the foundation, and his unwavering loyalty during difficult times had been rewarded with responsibilities that truly made a difference. In the room, 12 refugee children of various ages gathered in a circle, all wearing the same school uniforms provided free by the foundation. Amira had become a sort of young ambassador, helping newly arrived children adapt not only to the new country, but to the hope that the future could be better than the past. "Today we're going to learn basic first aid," she announced with the seriousness of a small teacher. "Not because we expect something bad to happen, but because it's good to know how to help when someone needs it." Maria, now working as a social worker for the foundation, watched the scene with tears of joy in her eyes. She had learned a valuable lesson about not judging people by their appearance or origin, and dedicated her days to ensuring others wouldn't make the same mistakes. In the corner of the room, an unexpected figure observed silently. Eleanor, now working as the cultural integration coordinator, had found her redemption helping the very people she had once persecuted. Her hair was grayer, and there was a softness in her eyes that had never existed before. The kind of change that only happens when someone genuinely confronts their own flaws and chooses to be better. "Eleanor," Amira called softly, "can you help us demonstrate how to apply a bandage? You learned so well last week." The girl's simple, inclusive invitation made Eleanor smile, a genuine smile that completely transformed her face. She approached the group, remembering how she had arrived there, not as an expert, but as someone who needed to learn how to be human again. As the children practiced basic first aid techniques, Robert arrived for his weekly visit. As he had promised, he had become a mentor not only to Amira, but to all the children at the foundation who showed an interest in the medical field. "How is our little doctor today?" he asked, kneeling down to Amira's level. "Happy," she replied simply. "This morning I helped a new girl stop being afraid of medical checkups, and this afternoon I'll play dolls with the other girls because Mommy said I still need to be a kid too." The wisdom contained in that answer made Robert smile. Amira had found the perfect balance between her extraordinary maturity and her natural need to live the childhood that circumstances had almost stolen from her. As the day drew to a close, Layla and Amira walked together through the foundation's gardens, where there had once been only cold concrete. Vance had insisted on creating a green space where families could gather and children could play. A constant reminder that even in the most barren places, life can flourish when given proper care. "Mommy," Amira said, watching other refugee families share stories in the garden, "do you think we did the right thing saving Mr. Vance?" Layla stopped and knelt beside her daughter, looking into her dark eyes that reflected all the wisdom gained from a life already rich with experience. "My dear," she said gently, "when you saved his life, you didn't just save a man. You saved the possibility for him to become a better person. And when he became a better person, he helped save many other lives. Sometimes, an act of kindness creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see." Amira nodded, intuitively understanding the depth of those words. She looked around the garden, at the families laughing together, at the children playing without fear, at the adults discussing hopes rather than just survival. "Mommy," she finally said, "I think I prefer saving lives this way, by making people want to live better, not just survive." As mother and daughter walked hand in hand toward their new home, a comfortable apartment provided by the foundation, where Amira had her own room and Layla had a space to read at night, the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with golden hues of promise. The little doctor had learned that sometimes saviors come in the most unlikely packages, and that true healing happens not just through medical techniques, but through compassion, courage, and the unwavering belief that all people deserve a second chance. And so, A cold winter morning that began with despair had transformed into the foundation of a new spring, not just for one refugee family, but for an entire community that learned to look beyond appearances to find the true worth of people.